everyone, welcome back to another True Potential Do More With Your Money podcast. And on this Friday, the 5th of July, a momentous political change day across the United Kingdom. I'm delighted to be joined in the podcast studio by Chris Leyland at the end of the table there, Director of Investment Strategy. In the middle, we've got Neil Rayner, who's Head of Central Advice, and to my right-hand side, Mark Henderson, who's a Senior Partner here at True Potential. How are you, gents?
Fantastic.
Yeah, I'm still in the job, unlike 250 Conservative MPs.
Correct. Well, let's see what the next half an hour brings, though, Mark. You never know. Mark, I'm going to start with you because in the words, I'll take you back to 1997 because it feels appropriate. In the words of one Sir Anthony Charles Linton Blair, a new dawn has broken, has it not? To a certain extent, Peter. A dawn that everybody saw coming. So the surprise element of the election result wasn't there. Chris will talk more about market reaction to it later on, but I think it's been a foregone conclusion, really, and I think the country's indicated they want a time for change. Let's get into the turnout later on, because you and I were talking about this earlier. But we do have a new government and an untried government, but that's where we are. And I think that from our point of view, managing money for clients, we remain absolutely impartial, and we'll look to allocate assets and resources where required in order to get the best return possible for our True Potential investor clients. Well, it's a great point. Just to sort of drum that message home, actually, because there are going to be hundreds of podcasts available today, not as good as this one, obviously, and people on the airwaves talking about what's happened in terms of politics, what it means, how it's happened, who's won when the seeds of it were sown. That's not what we're going to do for the next half an hour. I might give you a little bit of that later on for a bit of sport. But principally, as Mark said, our privilege is to look after 31 to 32 billion pounds of your pensions and your investments. So what we're going to do today is talk about the privilege it is to manage your money, what a change of government, if anything, might mean for your money. Chris at the end of the table there has had his eye on the markets all morning. Neil in the middle, specifically from a financial advisor point of view, looks at all the policy changes that have been announced, and we'll talk about some that potentially haven't, things that you should be looking out for and what you can do now to make sure that you're in the best financial position. That's what we'll talk about over the next half an hour. So stick with us. It'll be different to what you're getting on other podcasts today. We're not a bunch of political anoraks on here, but we are a bunch of people who are proud to manage your money. So on that point, Chris, has there been any market reaction? I spoke on this podcast a couple of weeks ago, I think, with you and Jeff, and we said that a lot of the results, what was then the forecast, was priced in, so we weren't expecting a huge change, but has there been any?
This won't come as a surprise. There has not been a big change overall. So if you look at what's happening in the main UK markets, so sterling's up around about 0.2% against the dollar. So sterling US dollars around about 127.7. If we look at what's happening in UK equity markets, so FTSE 100, when I last checked a few minutes ago, it was up 0.2%. But actually, if you compare it to other European stock markets that are open as at the same time, so if you look, France, Germany, Italy are all up today as well. If we look at what's happening in the UK bond market, so UK government bonds, what's called UK gilts, basically there's no change at all. So as Mark said earlier, asset markets are forward pricing. Now, what did we know before we came into the result? We knew that Labour were ahead in the polls. Now, I was looking at the bookies odds yesterday. I think it was 14-1 that Labour were going to get into power.
Yeah. Did you place a bet, Chris? I mean, there's a lot of it about at the minute.
I didn't place a bet. No. But for me, when I look at that, it's already there. It's already within the price overall. It's already taken account of. So that's why you haven't seen big moves today.
Do you normally get moves, though? I mean, let's just go over that one quickly. Would you normally expect a change of government, as large as this one, to trigger a reaction? Or does it generally not happen because things like this are priced in always?
Yeah. So what are the big drivers of asset markets? So the key drivers of asset markets are things such as direction of interest rates, direction of inflation, direction of economic growth, what's happening at a company level, what's happening with revenue, with earnings, with margins. They're the key drivers of asset markets overall. Now, when you go from maybe one type of party to a party that is very significantly different, again, depending if that was a a shock result, which doesn't really happen now, then that potentially could move asset markets overall. But if you think about it, you're going from a Conservative Party to a Labour Party. When you actually dig into that and you look at Sir Kier Starmer, he's very much just been described as centre-left. What does that mean? Well, he's kind of sitting in the middle. He's not a Jeremy Corbyn far-left type of leader. And actually, when you think around the level of debt that we have in the UK, if you look at public sector debt as a percentage of GDP, it's nearly 100% now.
Yeah.
Why is that important? It means that there isn't so much money to actually do something that is very different.
Yeah.
So actually, when you look at what Labour have inherited from the Conservatives, the economy that we're in right now, actually there really isn't that much money that different things can be done.
Yeah, and the Labour Party have made during the campaign, with Rachel Reeves, who'll now be, of course, the Chancellor, have made a big push to reassure markets, and they've announced that they would stick very closely to the Conservative government's fiscal rules. So, and I guess that was a lot with reassuring markets to get exactly what you've just said, which is the day they come into power, what they don't want, I guess, would be a big swing, a big change in what the markets are saying. So they've done a lot of work over the last months, many months, of reassuring markets to get what you've said this morning, which is basically markets taking in their stride. They don't want, I guess, a big up or a big down swing.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right, Peter. I mean, if you read through the Labour manifesto, one of the key things that comes in throughout the whole of the manifesto is basically economic stability.
Yeah.
What they don't want is a kind of rerun of what happened with Liz Truss 2 years ago. What they've learned is that they need to be very careful around the messaging there. They need to be very careful around how they think around the overall level of debt, particularly if they were looking to increase that level of debt.
Yeah.
How would they fund that? So in that sense, I suspect Labour will be very, very cautious around what they come out with, certainly in the very, very near term overall.
Neil, just coming to you in the middle because, are you expecting a lot of calls from clients? You particularly head up the central advice team here, managing tens and tens of thousands of clients who call you up and ring us up and send messages in here directly when they've got questions, which, by the way, we invite you to do. I think it's great. If you've got any questions or any specifics around how things might affect your money, do exactly that. Ring Neil up and his team. Send us a message in. It's what we're here for. Are you expecting an influx of that today or not?
We have seen a rise in calls in the last week. There have been questions around, and typically when you're talking about financial products, you're inevitably talking about tax allowances. And there has been a rise in that. Is my tax-free cash going to be affected? Has the recent lifetime allowance changes been affected, or are Labour going to change them if they come into power? So there's them sort of questions, but not a massive amount. Not a massive amount, but like you said. We're the experts here from a tax allowance and tax-free cash point of view, and are they going to put up the ISA allowance, that sort of stuff. So
well, let's get into some of that then. I mean, what are the top 3, 4, 5, if you like, policies, whether it's to do with tax or to do with pensions, that Labour have? What have they said so far? For example, you go through them, and because they'll be the things that are on clients' minds this morning. Yeah,
I mean, with tax-free cash, everybody knows that for some considerable time you've had. Typically 25% of your pension pot will be tax-free. There's been no indications that that'll change, because it's been a pretty standard rule for quite some time. And I think to change that would be a bit of an upheaval with regards to the market and what people have hopefully saved with for the rest of their life. But they have just changed the lifetime allowance. They've said that there's not a limit on what you can put in, and you won't be penalised for that. Whether or not they're going to change that, they've not come out now and said we won't. But I think there's some good indications that they probably won't change that immediately. So things like that. The ISA allowance has been pretty static at 20,000 for some time now. It'd be great if they could increase that. It would be beneficial for our savers. But nothing has majorly changed. But it's very
and
early
won't
days.
Do for a while anyway.
And it's very early days.
They'll probably do like a lot of incoming governments do, especially when it's a change of party. Probably will do some kind of emergency budget in the first 100 days or so, or later on this year. But the real big first budget would be probably in the spring of next year. And that's when you might see if any, changes. So I guess the message would be, Mark, Labour were never going to come into power and change everything straight away. That's not how it works. So what we do know is that we've got these allowances that Neil's talked about. Yeah. We know the state of play with pensions and investments today. That's all you do know. So use what you've got while you've got it.
Absolutely. Today, where there's a degree of uncertainty still out there, Peter. The big change could come in, or the first indication of where taxation is going to go could well be October. I think they might be planning an autumn statement there, Peter, just after the party conferences later in the year. But what we do know factually is that 83% of the money that we look after for clients are in tax-protected products. By that I mean pension or ISA. So financial advice and good planning by clients have got that money put into a safe home, safe from taxation anyway. Anybody who's looking today should think about maximising the contributions they make into both ISA and pension, because we know what they are, and then see what happens in the first budget that comes out. There's a lot at play here, and I think that one of the smartest elements of the campaign that was run by the Labour Party was just actually to say nothing and let the mismanagement of the Conservative campaign take over. Yeah. So by saying nothing, it just gives that almost stability going into it. The two areas that have been silent though on are inheritance tax and capital gains tax. So they, if you like, would be the areas where I would encourage clients to think now, have a good think about it, involve their financial advisor to make sure that things are set up optimally for today.
And it's worth saying, capital gains tax that you've talked about, that's a tax that affects people who've got investments that then come to withdraw them or sell them down. So it will affect, and if you've got an investment ISA, for example, that's your tax. That would be the one to have a look at, wouldn't it, to see what's going on, so you could take proper advice on.
Yeah, put as much money as you can in the ISA because it's capital gains tax free. But if you have exceeded or put as much in as you can into both pension and ISA, don't sit on cash if you've got a long-term plan for it, because get that invested as well. Even though there will be tax to pay any gains, don't sit idle on cash. And I think one of the things going forward that a future UK government will do is look to how to mobilise domestic savings, because there will be spending required, Peter, and government might not be able to fund it.
Well, this is it. This is the point, isn't it? That the Labour Party will. May not be able to do everything it wants to do. There might be some things it has to do that it didn't want to do. When they get in and they have see the books, if you like. So they may be tempted to come for some of these changes later. They may not. But as we said before, all you do know is right now you've got those allowances. Use them while you can. Some things, as you say, pensions, ISA is particularly sheltered from tax. Other types of investments less so or not. So we know the lay of the land now. Play with the rules. You've got to play with the rules as they are right now, right?
Yeah, whether or not the change or not is whatever policy they bring in. But Mark was quite right in what he said. You've got some generous tax allowances at the moment which you can use, and you've used in the past. So have a look at that. Call us at True Potential. Book yourself in with a financial advisor, and we can discuss what you can and can't.
Because the other one is pension. Well, I'll get your view on pension freedoms, Mark, in a moment, because that was a big thing back in 2015 when that came in. But of course, one thing that every budget for the last 10 years, this idea of the tax relief you get when you pay into your pension. So the relief you get, the bit of, if you like, tax on top of that, tax relief on top of that is at your marginal rate. And there's been loads of clamour for years now of should they reduce the additional and the higher rate pension relief you get on a pension contribution and just bring it down to a standard, say 25% or whatever. Analysts reckon that would save tens of billions of pounds, which the new government might need to do. So there may be some interest in doing that, Neil. But right now, that hasn't happened. So again, this could be a good time to top your pension up, get a bit more in now. If you're one of those people who's going to be benefiting from a higher rate tax relief, it's there right now. Yeah,
there's more people obviously pushed into a higher rate now. So you've got your basic rate, your automatic uplift, which you get your 20% uplift on your pension contributions, and then if you're a higher rate taxpayer or additional rate, you can claim a further tax back. But whether or not they change that to a flat rate, some people talk about that between 30-33% across the board. As an example, if you're a higher rate and they brought in a flat rate, you're going to lose out on tax contributions. So you're quite right. Take advantage of what you've got now and get that tax put into your pension.
Pension freedoms then, Mark. I've seen a bit talked about that today, whether that was very much a sort of a jewel in the crown, I guess, of the Tories and George Osborne's budget in 2015.
Yeah.
Unsure what will happen with pension. I mean, just to maybe explain first of all what pension freedoms are before we get into whether they're going to be around or not. You know, what was your personal view of them as somebody who runs a big pension company?
It was a surprise to the market. It was a surprise to the industry, and it was probably one of the finest bits of legislation that has come through, because it gave people with pensions, which is their money that they've saved, Peter, so it is still their money, the ability to use that fund as and when they wanted to, without restriction, without being told what they had to do with it. And I think that the benefit for not just people who are drawing their pension, but also their families, as that pension fund could be passed on to future generations, was a great liberation of a long time locked up assets. And as I mentioned before, out of the money that we're managing, over 70% of it is in pensions and can benefit from pension freedom. So we know that's there now. That was probably, I think, George Osborne's finest moment as a Chancellor, and probably the biggest achievement of the Cameron Osborne partnership. Kind of fell apart in 2016, as we well know, which was another surprise to the market when the Brexit result came out. You know, Chris was saying before that the markets don't like surprises. So I think that where we are with pension freedoms at the moment, we need to just continue with that. Not that anybody from the Labour Party will be watching this, I don't think, but we'd encourage you and urge you not to mess around with that too much, because it is of benefit to savers in the UK.
Is the I mean, Chris, you know, is the best thing that a new Labour government could do in terms of pensions is just leave them alone, because every government is tempted by them. I mean, and that's not a party political point at all, because it's happened under all sorts of governments, but they're an attractive thing for governments to look at and to tinker with, because the rules around them are so complex. That's why we need experts like Neil to navigate through us. But, you know, is the best thing that they could do is just not touch them for a while?
Yeah, look, my view is everybody needs to save into a pension. What do we know? We know that there's a savings gap. We know that people aren't saving enough into their pensions to have the retirement that they would like to have. People need to save more overall. So in some ways, for them to tinker negatively, so to maybe reduce the amount, increase the amount of tax that people pay on pensions, I think that would be a very, very negative thing to do. I think, you know, if they were to basically allow a little bit more freedom in respect of tax, clearly that will be a good thing to do. People need to save more into their pensions overall. But for me, either leave it alone or allow for more money to go into a pension in a more tax-friendly way.
Yeah, definitely. It was some good, a good point what Mark said before. Pensions have, we call them pension freedoms, but, pensions have never been more flexible. It's a lot of business that we transact on a day-by-day basis in True Potential. And, you've got not only a tax relief, you can take a lot of money how you wish out of your pension. Mark was talking about the death benefits. Years ago, they used to be very static. It used to give you very few options on retirement. And now they're, a great place to save and provide for your retirement. And Chris has got a good point there, allow people to put more money maybe into their pensions, but don't tinker with it negatively, positively.
Give people a bit of certainty over it. Let's just pause in the UK for a second. I want to pop across the Atlantic to get a quick view on the American market, if we can, Chris, and we'll come back. And I can't resist. I'm going to ask you, I want to get your opinions on what happened overnight and where you think things were won and lost and all the rest of it. So I'll come back to that in a second. But Chris, we talked at the start of this podcast around, if you like, the UK market's taking it in their stride. But in America, it is a bit different, right? So there's a big election coming up later in the year in America. We know that those polls were quite tight. They seem to be a bit less tight in the last week after that big TV debate in Donald Trump's favour. But anyway, who knows what will be the outcome over there. But is it right that in America, a change of government or markets have a bigger impact on people? Because you might have people watching this podcast now thinking, why does a change of president affect my pension or my investments in the UK more than a change of government here? Why is that?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It's one that we're asked quite a lot. So if we just start with actually the percentage of US companies that make up world stock markets, So the US is the largest part of world stock markets overall. So if we look at an index, say something like MSCI World, something like that, US is around about 67% of world listed companies overall. So what happens in the US really matters, and what happens in the US will drive what's happening globally in respect of returns overall. Now, when we think around, maybe I'll give you some examples here. So think around where a change of president has actually affected stock markets in the short term. Probably the best example of that would be Donald Trump, and it would be Q4 2018. It would be the US-China trade war, the tariffs, my button's bigger than your button, all those things that Trump came out with. But within that, what we saw was a sell-off in the final quarter. But then actually, if you went into January 2019, you actually saw markets re-accelerate into 2019 overall. And 2019 was a really strong year for equity market returns overall. So I think the key there is it did lead to some noise in the short term. Obviously, Donald Trump was a very different character. I would not describe him as a centrist president in any way, shape or form.
Do you think?
So he's very different to what we have right now. But within that, the key point is that if you look at the long-term US stock market track record, it's just a blip. And you can see that stock markets trend up significantly. Otherwise, people just wouldn't invest in them. And for me, the key message, certainly from my perspective, is that politics can lead to some noise in the short term, but over the longer term, there are much bigger things out there that are key drivers of return.
Right, let's bring it back home then, Mark. What do you think are the top three? Well, let's get one each actually from you. Top three things that you think are in Kier Starmer's in-tray as he comes into Downing Street later on today. What's top of his agenda? I don't mean his political agenda. What do you think he's presented with in the country that he's got to sort out? I'll rephrase my question for a third time. What do you think the top three should be? Let's go there. Go on, Mark. You go first, Mark.
I think that there'll be part of his mind. And it's a very, might be a small part, but there's a whisper in his head might be going, oh God, we've won.
Now what do I do?
He's been positioning himself for it, as any politician would, to win this election, but he's been in opposition, and it's a huge difference from being in opposition, from being a critic to being an implementer of policy. So I think there's a lot of things going to be on his mind, Peter. I've got a list of what they've said. The first thing is, in 9th of July, he attends a 3-day NATO meeting. Now, that's going to be on his mind because he's gone from domestic politician to an international politician, which is going to be in focus. So defence spending is going to be there. There's a Rwanda asylum scheme, which is going to be scrapped.
I think it might be scrapped by the time this podcast goes out. But
I think it probably already has been scrapped. Speaking to the BMA about the junior doctor strike. So you asked for one, I've just given you three or four there, but there's a lot of work to be done for a new government.
I think you've demonstrated how his interest is going to pile up pretty quickly.
Very much so. And that Peter, is the knowns. If you think back to what happened in 2019, where the world was hit by COVID, none of the world leaders had dealt with anything like that before. And regardless of what your political feelings are, you had a UK government that had to deal with an unknown situation. Keir Starmer, there's something out there that's going to hit hit his inbox very, very quickly that we don't know about at the moment. So how they react to that and how strong a team he's got around him. So it's not just about one man, this.
Absolutely. Neil, what would you put in his top three in his in-tray?
Well, they talk about, potential nationalisation again of, certain like Royal Mail or the railways or something like that. But I think from our point of view, from a savings point of view, and from a financial services point of view, I think it would be not to rock the boat. I think you're talking about things like they want a stable government. They don't want the nightmares that you had with Liz Truss and the emergency budget. I think it would be just to remain calm from that point of view. But from a savings point of view, I would just say get on the side of savers. We talked about not rocking the boat between, maybe taking away tax allowances, and I think that would be a big plus if we could keep that on an agreeable level. So I think that would be a good thing moving forward.
I think for me, Neil's actually stolen what I was going to say, but I'd probably say something maybe a little bit different, which is, if I was in Kier Starmer's shoes right now, I would be thinking around, what can I do that I want to do within my fiscal constraints? Mm-hmm. But I think the key thing is keeping everything stable, economic stability, and not rocking the boat.
Yeah. What's your personal takeaway though? I mean, as you say, Mark, we're totally impartial. We're not. We have a vote like everybody else in this country, but this podcast isn't for political opinions at all. It's for what we do with your money. But I'm just interested in your perspective. I mean, you don't get these kind of sea changes. I know you get change of government potentially. You could have a change of government every 5 years, but you don't get these historical landslides come around. You've got to go back to 1997 for the last time we had one. So they don't come around that often. What's your view about, if you like, how it happened, or maybe any of the particular like turnout and things like that? Is there anything jumping out at you is significant about this other than the result itself?
I think if we just look locally for a moment, Peter, the MP for Hexham, where I live, there's been a Conservative MP in Hexham for over 100 years, up until last night.
Yeah.
So and that's not a reflection on the individual who's the MP. I think it was a vote against what they've seen in the last couple of either months or years of a Tory government that's been in power, for many, many years. And this is the first election that we've had since 2019. So Sir Kier Starmer will be the first elected Prime Minister we've had in nearly 5 years. Yeah. And I think that is a message, really, I think, for the complacency that seems to have crept in. When you look at the campaign, it started off disastrously in a rainstorm. You've had, the missed opportunities, and you've had some real bad steps, to come away from Normandy, to miss the real message about how Rishi Sunak's family came to the UK and through hard work, which should be an aspiration, missed the point by saying, I didn't have Sky TV as a child. The total wrong message to give in what could have been a very strong message. So I think there's been mismanagement of a campaign there.
But even to call the election in now versus, I'm on the record on this podcast earlier in the year saying it was going to be on November the 14th or something. And I think, he's probably sitting there now, wherever he is, thinking, I wish it was.
Did he have a bet, Peter?
No, I didn't.
There's another thing,
I didn't,
What a mess.
I think there was a couple of questions on the BBC News this morning. A couple of comments that to say from Tory MPs to say that we didn't deliver on what we said we would do with regards to certain things. So I would have thought Kier Starmer's probably objective this time is to make sure that they do on that. But as we said, with different governments through the years, it's very difficult to say you're going to do everything. But to start off well, and to look at certain areas might be a key thing.
It's interesting, Chris, isn't it, that he's got this huge majority in terms of the number of seats he has, and that's going to give us stability in this country, which a lot of people have been crying out for, and I imagine it will reassure markets as well that he has that big majority. But is there a question mark around the foundations it's built on when you look at I think the turnout for this election, it's slightly changing, but I think it's going to settle somewhere around 59-60%. Typically you'd have 67-68% for a general election. So the turnout's down. As I understand it, the Labour Party has won this with a massive majority, but the share of the vote is around about 35%. Again, typically you'd normally be looking for around 43, 44, 45 to form a government, so that's well down. I noticed that Kier Starmer and Rishi Sunak both got re-elected in their seats, but each one of them lost about 10,000 votes. So, you wonder, it's obviously been a very effective Labour strategy in terms of how they've won it, because they've got it with a lower share of the vote, but this massive majority. Is there a question about how solid it is, though, if you like, in terms of the public appetite? Clearly, if he's got 33% of the vote, 35, 2/3 of the country didn't vote for the Labour Party, which, as I say, governments get in never with more than 50% ever. There's always a majority who didn't. That's the way our electoral system works. But I wonder how solid it is.
I think it's a good question. I was looking at some stats, so it's the lowest turnout since, I think, 1885. And just maybe, talking to individuals, talking to people in the office, I think a lot of people were maybe quite confused around how to vote. But what they did know is that they weren't happy with the Conservative government.
Yeah.
And that, I think, goes on to kind of Mark's point of, the Conservative government came out, they spoke a lot. A lot of the stuff that they came out with was pretty poor overall, whereas Labour were much, much quieter. But I think people had maybe decided that, they didn't want to have a Conservative government anymore. I think they maybe blame the Conservative government for things such as the cost of living crisis, the fact that we had higher inflation, interest rates going up, and that's not the fault of the Conservative Party. It's the fault of where we are and everything that happened within COVID, etc. But I think, I think you're right. I think there's maybe a little bit of confusion around exactly who people wanted to vote for. And you can see that with the turnout. You can see that by the fact that so few people actually bothered to vote.
Yeah. And there was a lot of emphasis as well, if you remember, through the election on Rishi Sunak and his personal wealth. And you're talking about, Mark was talking about the "we grew up without Sky" comment. Yeah. And maybe, the media implosion and, the effect that it had on the voter. Turned them either to not vote, potentially because of the low turnout rates.
Yeah, and there was always an element of foregone conclusion. It doesn't matter who I vote for. I'm not going to affect the results.
Some say, why bother voting?
Why bother going out? Which I think is a shame. But as you said there, Peter, that more people didn't vote that way than did.
Well, as always, but the amount of people who didn't vote for the Labour Party, but yet they've got this majority. I mean, there'll be books and there'll be all sorts of things written about how you can have a 10% lower share of the vote than typically, but yet end up with a 170-odd seat majority. It is a quirk of our electoral system.
Yeah, there might be a bit of apathy as well. I remember in one of the TV debates, there was a lady, said quite bravely, "Are you two the best that this country's got to offer?" And I think, going back to the US as well, that's a question that's been asked quite a lot.
Who'd be a politician, eh?
Who would? Who would?
Well, I mean, I think we should, say they've won it fair and square. Congratulations to the Labour Party, and we wish. I think, irrespective of your personal feelings and how you vote, that's people's private business. But I think everybody would just wish now, if you like, the best of luck to the new Prime Minister and his government, because we need a bit of stability in the country, and we need and a government that's functioning and working well in all of our interests is good for everyone. So we'll keep a close eye on what policy announcements do come out over the next few months, more likely than weeks, I would say, but let's keep a close eye. You can be assured that if there are any changes that affect your money, whether it's through pensions or tax allowances or whatever it might be, we are right across it here, and we will cover them on this podcast very closely. We'll be writing to our clients, I'm sure, as well. There's a lot of content that we do push out. We've got a quarterly magazine that comes out, which will get into all this as well. So there's lots of ways that we'll keep you informed. But as ever, if you have questions, you know where we are. Just give us a ring, send us an email, drop us a message, and we'll do our best to answer them. Right, final question. Let's have a little change of gear away from politics. There's a big football match coming up this weekend. We haven't talked about football too much on the podcast, probably because it's not a football podcast. But while we're talking about people winning and losing, are England going to win this weekend? Mark?
Before I answer that, Peter, just a little bit of explanation. If anybody notices the staff behind us dressed casually, it's not because they've clocked off or anything like that. It's one of our charity days, and this month's charity is motor neuron disease, hence the colours. The orange and the blue out there. So that was it. Now, orange could lead you into Holland. And if we do win, we could play Holland next, Peter. So
that was a very good segue, Mark. I mean, I like what you did there.
If we do win, look, come on. Yes, we're going to win this weekend. We, as in England, conscious of the fact that not everybody watching this will share the same enthusiasm for either Gareth Southgate or an England win going forward. But I think, yes, England will win this weekend.
Well, let me get a score off you.
2-1.
3-0 for me.
I'll go for England winning 1-0.
All right.
And you've asked a man who doesn't follow football at all for a score.
Which means he'll be right.
He will be the next England manager.
That's right. Excellent. Good. Okay. Well, thank you, Chris, Neil, and Mark. Thank you also for watching this week's podcast, as ever. And if you haven't, I'm sure you probably have, but if you haven't, do not forget to hit subscribe, because that is the best way to make sure that you don't miss these podcasts and our other content going forwards. And as I say, there's a lot that we'll be keeping an eye on over the next few months that will be relevant to you, no doubt. So the best way to not miss it is to hit that red subscribe button. Give us a like if you wouldn't mind as well, because it always makes our day. But for now, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time. Bye for now.